This house will belong to me sooner or later. As for you, you'd be better off in some cheap nursing home." Belle looked at me with the eyes of someone who believed that money could crush anyone. The lottery ticket in her hand had stripped her of her dignity. I stood still, hearing only the cold rhythm of my own heartbeat. No response, no explanation. But in that silence, I whispered to myself, if Belle thinks she can turn my life into a stage for her little performance, then I'll give her a show that'll make her cry blood. I stared directly at that smug face and said slowly, "Are you sure? Because if you lay your hands on something that isn't yours, don't blame anyone when you're shoved into hell." Belle laughed a scornful, spine-chilling laugh. She thought I was weak, thought I didn't dare fight back. Pathetic. The only thing she didn't know is that I was the one who designed this game. And what about you? If one day someone stood in the middle of your house and told you that you were useless and unworthy of living here, would you stay silent or push back? Subscribe now and leave a comment below, because in the next episode, I'll show you just how dangerous a mother can become when she's cornered. I was born into a poor family, raised by the scent of sweat and the sound of my parents' weary sighs. This house is the result of 40 years of working 2 jobs at once, saving every spare coin, every overtime dollar. When Arthur was still alive, he used to stand on the porch, look at the red-tiled roof and say, "Our house isn't big, but it's safe." After he passed, that sentence became a promise I clung to. Mason used to be my pride. He was smart, hard-working, with a future that looked bright. When he brought Belle home, she came with a warm smile, a firm handshake, and eyes full of love for him. Everyone said Mason was lucky to have chosen a wife who knew how to take care of things. On their wedding day, Arthur cleaned Mason's glasses and said, "Just protect her from now on." But life is full of cruel surprises. The accident struck when Mason was only 30, a single side swipe enough to crush his legs and confine him to a wheelchair for life. 3 months in the hospital, and Belle didn't shed a single tear. I once thought that was a strength, but later realized it was repressed disappointment. Our 3-generation household shrank, tense as an over-tightened string. I became Mason's legs, the pillar of the home, and the ears to hear Belle's nightly sighs when she thought I was asleep. One afternoon, I stopped by the corner convenience store for some bread. On the counter sat a stack of lottery tickets, the familiar rows of numbers pulling at my gaze. Arthur used to say it was just for fun, not to expect anything. But that day, I took one, read the numbers, my husband's birthday, mine, Mason's, Ava's, Micah's, all strung together as if fate had accidentally lined them up. That night, when the house was quiet, I turned on the TV to check the results. The numbers rolled by, my heart pounding. When the last number matched the ticket in my hand, I jumped up. My heart felt like it fell out of my chest. $85 million. I stared at the ticket under the yellow light, my hand trembling so hard I almost dropped it. Joy didn't explode. It was laced with disbelief. I immediately tucked it into the small drawer at the bottom of a metal box, locked it, as if even breathing too hard might scare away the luck. The next morning, Belle stood in the kitchen looking annoyed. She glanced at the stack of bills I left on the table and asked, "Why is the electric bill so high this month?" I told her it was because Mason's heater ran all night. The weather was too cold. Belle exhaled a long breath, colder than the outside air. She didn't say more, just turned to the sink, scrubbing hard enough that water splashed onto the floor. Mason wheeled in, resting his hands on his lap, eyes avoiding mine. He asked a few casual questions, then rolled into his office, leaving me and Belle in a silence that weighed like stone. I thought it was just fatigue, but Belle started nitpicking small things. Every time I bought beef from Mason, she'd say, "How are we supposed to save like this?" When I bought medicine for the kids, she'd say, "There's cheaper stuff, Mom." I stayed silent, while Mason always chose to escape by turning up the volume on the TV. On weekend nights, I looked in the mirror and saw more gray in my hair. I wondered if Belle knew about the ticket. Would she be happy? Would the family light up a little? That thought only lasted a few seconds before a cold sensation crawled down my spine. Belle was no longer the gentle girl she once was. Sometimes her eyes looked like blades hidden behind a smile. I buried the secret deep, afraid that this happiness, if revealed, would become a disaster. But I still wanted to believe one thing, that if the family found out, things might get better. Mason could receive better physical therapy, Belle could feel less burdened, and the kids might have a brighter future. I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm, like someone holding powdered glass, knowing one wrong grip could shatter it all. Then, one night while tidying the living room, I saw Belle standing on the stairs, hands on her hips, looking at me with a strange expression. It made me freeze. It wasn't a normal look. It was like she was waiting for me to slip, ready to pounce. I asked her, "Is something wrong?" Belle replied with a soft, sharp voice, "Nothing, just watching how busy you are." A simple sentence, but it cut through the already suffocating air like a cold knife. That night, I lay in bed uneasy. It felt like someone was touching my secret. I went downstairs, checked the cabinet, and looked around. Then, I went to my room, grabbed the key, and unlocked the metal box at the bottom of the closet. The box opened, dust still on the rim. I reached into the small compartment for the lottery ticket. I turned left, then right, pulled out all the papers inside. No ticket. I searched every drawer, checked every cushion and pillow. The ticket wasn't where I had left it. No trace. In that moment, my entire body went cold. The room darkened not from lack of light, but from a shadow of dread covering everything. From behind the door, I heard footsteps, soft, as if someone had just walked by. I held my breath. My heart thudded, each beat heavy. The ticket had vanished from its hiding place. No warning, no sound. And before I could think further, I heard a faint click downstairs, like someone quietly closing a drawer. I stood frozen, my whole body numb, because in that moment, I knew everything had just begun. And the one who touched my secret might still be standing somewhere inside this house. The next morning, I walked down to the kitchen and saw Belle standing by the window, phone in hand, her face flushed as if she'd just run a long distance. But I knew nothing could have riled her up like that at 7 in the morning. She stared at the screen, lips twitching as if struggling to contain a surge of frantic joy. A crooked smile appeared on her face, both elated and on the verge of madness. I stopped on the stairs and watched her. Belle didn't notice me, her hand trembling as she dialed someone. Her voice was urgent, low, and thrilled, as if she'd just discovered the key to a treasure vault. Yeah, that's right. I'm not joking. I'm serious. My life's about to change. Every word she uttered crushed a thick black premonition into my chest. When I stepped into the kitchen, Belle startled and instantly locked her screen. Her eyes flashed with panic, then turned guarded. I asked, calmer than I expected, "What's going on, Belle? You seem happy." Belle turned away, her shoulders stiffening. She answered curtly, coldly, like a blade across the skin. "None of your business." I froze. That sentence hit like a slap. In 9 years as my daughter-in-law, Belle had never spoken to me that way. I looked directly at her pale face. The earlier smile had vanished, replaced by a wary, possessive look, as if she were hiding treasure in her hands. I stepped closer, speaking gently. "If something's wrong, just say so. I'm always." Belle turned sharply, shot me a look laced with disdain, and cut me off. "Stay out of it." Her voice wasn't loud, but for the first time in my life, I heard pure hatred directed at me. The change was so sudden, it took me a few seconds to grasp what was happening. Even Mason noticed something was off. When he wheeled himself into the living room, he asked Belle what was wrong, but she avoided him, making an excuse to go upstairs, locking the door behind her. That had never happened in this house. Mason called her a few times, and Belle responded only with, "Leave me alone." Then I heard her laugh behind the door, a soft, twisted laugh of someone clutching a massive secret. I sat in the living room trying to piece everything together. That strange smile this morning, the secretive phone call, the locked door, that possessive look. A thought struck me, sending a chill down my spine. No, it couldn't be, but the truth kept pounding in my head like footsteps stomping straight into my heart. Belle had found the lottery ticket. There was no doubt anymore. The feeling was too clear. I remembered the faint click last night, the sound of the drawer gently sliding shut, then footsteps in the hallway. In this house, besides me, only Belle could move that quietly. Mason can't move that fast, and the kids were asleep. It had to be her. I tried to stay calm, wondering if Belle had seen the signature on the back of the ticket. Did she know who bought it? But I couldn't understand why she thought it belonged to her, why she dared to shift her attitude as if fortune was hers by right. I considered gently bringing it up with Mason, but looking at him in that wheelchair, eyes red from a sleepless night, I couldn't add another burden on his shoulders. Belle didn't come out of her room the entire afternoon. From time to time, I heard the sound of drawers opening, suitcase zippers, and rustling paper. Once, while passing by, I heard her whispering into her phone. "Yeah, I've got it now. Don't worry. I'm doing the paperwork tomorrow. I know I deserve this." Every word stabbed deeper into my chest. That evening, Mason knocked on Belle's door, asking to talk, but she wouldn't open it. Eventually, worn out, he wheeled back to the living room and sighed, his shoulders trembling slightly. "Mom, I don't know what's wrong with Belle. She locked herself in, turned off her phone, and kept avoiding me." I placed a hand on his shoulder, trying to steady my voice. "Let me try talking to her." I walked to Belle's door. I knocked 3 times softly but clearly. After a while, footsteps slowly approached. The door creaked open, just enough for me to see half her face in the yellow light. Her eyes were red, but not from crying, more like from exhilaration. Her hands gripped the door edge tightly, as if holding something behind her back. I spoke quietly. "Belle, I think we need to talk. Did you happen to find—" She didn't let me finish. Belle's eyes widened, a strange smile stretching across her face, the kind someone wears after pushing another off a cliff and waiting to hear the crash. She placed her hand on her chest, tilted her head slightly, and whispered with a sweetness that sent chills down my spine. "From now on, what you want to get back belongs to me." I stood frozen. Belle looked at me through the narrow gap, her eyes gleaming like greedy fingers touching gold. "You'd better get used to it." Because from now on, my life's changed. The door shut right after that sentence. As it closed, my chest felt crushed. I placed a hand on the wall to steady myself. The house seemed drained of all air. Even Mason's wheelchair seemed distant. No one needed to say anything more. I understood one thing with absolute clarity. Belle believed the lottery ticket was hers. She believed it so deeply that she dared to challenge me that way. But what chilled me wasn't just the fact that she found the ticket. It was her eyes, smug, triumphant, like a warning that a storm was coming to sweep both me and Mason out of this house. I turned away, walking toward the stairs, every step sinking into a cold abyss. Each footfall against the floor sounded like the toll of a bell announcing the next tragedy. What I feared most wasn't losing the money. It was that Belle now knew she held something that could destroy this family. As I reached the last step, I heard the lock upstairs click open. Belle's door flung wide, followed by a loud thud that startled me. A black premonition crept through me like poison wind. I looked up and saw Belle standing at the railing, her hair hanging like a shadow. And in her hand, I saw something familiar, the paper slightly wrinkled, glowing under the yellow light. I knew what it was immediately. But what shook me more than the fact that she was holding it was the way Belle looked at me through the staircase with eyes that had decided my life now belonged to her. And before I could even say her name, Belle curled her lips into a victorious smile, the smile of someone who believed she had won it all. In that instant, I knew the lottery ticket in her hand wasn't just luck. It was a weapon, and she was about to use it to stab straight into the heart of my family. The next morning, I was making tea when I heard Belle's voice from the living room. Her tone was loud, contemptuous. "Yes, I'm quitting today. I don't need this lousy, underpaid job anymore." She laughed mockingly, as if the whole world was beneath the stroke of fortune she believed she had grasped. I stood still behind the kitchen door, listening to every word, dropping like stones into the quiet lake that was our home. After hanging up, Belle turned around, her face flushed with glee, her eyes gleaming like someone who had just won a high-stakes game. She saw me, but didn't bother hiding her arrogance. "I'm done with the miserable routine of clocking in and out." Her voice trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from excitement she could barely contain. I looked at Mason sitting by the door, his hand resting on the wheelchair, worry in his eyes, but no words escaping his lips. Belle walked toward Mason. She reached into my son's wallet, rifling through each pocket. The rustling sound sent chills down my spine. She pulled out some cash, stuffed it into her pocket with swift, practiced movements. Mason looked down at the floor, his hand quivering, but he said nothing. I knew exactly how humiliated he felt, being treated like a helpless man by his own wife, right in front of his mother. I was about to speak when Belle glanced at me, her smirk curling with mockery. "What are you staring at? This house needs money to survive, or are you planning to be the CFO?" I swallowed the hurt, held back my response, knowing Mason was bearing the deepest wounds in silence. My son's quiet agony sliced through me more sharply than any shouting ever could. Belle roamed the house like it was already her domain. Every footstep echoed with a sense of power she thought she now possessed. Her eyes swept across the room, landing on the cabinet where I kept our monthly bills. "You're living off my household," she snapped when she saw me holding the stack. "Don't pretend you pity anyone here," she snarled. "You two are the curse of my life." I drew in a deep breath to stay composed. I couldn't afford to falter now, couldn't let Belle see me waver. I folded the bills, set them on the table, and looked her dead in the eye. "I have never been a burden on anyone." Belle laughed, sharp and cold. "Oh, really? What do you think Mason's been feeding you with magic?" Her words weren't wrong by definition, but the cruelty in her voice made my chest tighten with grief. Mason wheeled toward Belle, trying to calm the tension. "Belle, don't say that. Mom's done so much for us." Belle snapped around, her eyes blazing. "Shut up. You can't even walk. Who are you to lecture me?" Her words struck Mason like a spear. He flinched, his hands slipping from the wheels, the chair jolting with the shock. I had never seen him bow his head that low before. I stepped beside my son, resting a hand on his shoulder. I could feel his trembling through my bones. Mason didn't cry, but his eyes were red, torn between shame and despair. Belle saw it all, but there wasn't a flicker of sympathy in her eyes, only cold, triumphant satisfaction. That afternoon, Belle paced around the living room on the phone, sketching out plans to burn through money. "First, I'm getting a new car," she said, "then a set of fancy dinnerware for the celebration." She chuckled darkly, voice dripping with disdain. "That old hag won't stop me anymore." I sat in the kitchen, each of her words sinking like rocks into the still pond of my soul, stirring up the silent mud buried deep for years. When Mason wheeled into the bedroom, I followed. He sat on the bed, burying his face in his hands. The room turned dim, the drawn curtains suffocating the air more than ever. "I'm sorry, Mom," murmured, his voice caught in his throat. "I don't know what's gotten into her anymore." I gripped his hand. "It's not your fault. Belle is blinded by something." I didn't say the word greed, but Mason understood it. I left his room at dusk. The house was eerily quiet, like it had just weathered a storm that tore away a piece of every soul inside. Passing the living room, I saw Belle gazing into a mirror, whispering to herself, "I'm different now. I'll live the life I deserve." That sentence rang like a bell tolling before a tragedy. The kids went to bed earlier than usual. Ava hugged her teddy bear and looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "Grandma, is Mommy mad?" I patted her head and said everything would be fine. But even I didn't believe it. The children could sense the poison seeping into every corner, the cold air Belle had released into our home. That night, I sat alone at the dining table, staring at the dim yellow lights. I thought about Arthur, about his last words to me before he passed. "Don't let this family break." Those words returned like blades slicing through my chest. But I knew if that lottery ticket ended up in the wrong hands, this family wouldn't just break, it would be reduced to dust. I got up, headed toward my room, each step heavier than the last. I had to retrieve the lottery ticket. I had to get it back from Belle before she turned it into a weapon of destruction. I opened my bedroom door, heart pounding in my chest. The metal box was still in its usual spot, tucked beneath the drawer in the bottom of the wardrobe. I knelt, inhaled deeply. As I pulled the drawer open, its creak sliced through the air like a blade. I looked inside. I froze. The drawer gaped open, contents shoved aside. The metal box lay toppled over, its lid ajar, papers scattered, some even fallen to the floor. No longer intact like the day before. Someone had ransacked it. I reached out with shaking hands, picking up each sheet, insurance papers, utility bills, handwritten notes. But the one thing I needed was gone. I flipped the box over, searching every corner. Empty. Both the drawer and the box that once held the most critical secret of my life were now cold, hollow voids. I sat on the floor, knees touching the icy edge of the cabinet. My heart felt like a crumpled sheet of paper. My worst fear had come true. Belle had torn through my room, reached into what I thought was safe, and taken the ticket. She now saw it as hers, ready to use it to bury both Mason and me. From the hallway came a soft chuckle, thin and poisonous like a wire. I turned toward the door. In the dark, I saw Belle's shadow slip by like the silhouette of someone who had just seized complete victory. I stepped out of my room with my heart pounding. The clatter of pots in the kitchen, the soft breathing of children in the small bedroom. All of it felt stretched taut by an invisible thread, ready to snap. I looked for Belle in the living room. She was sitting cross-legged, phone in hand, wearing a smug smile like she'd just conquered the world. My throat tightened as I approached her. I asked, keeping my voice as calm as possible, "Belle, where's the lottery ticket?" As soon as the words left my mouth, Belle paused, set her phone on the table, and looked at me with a mix of challenge and amusement. She crossed her arms and tilted her head as if preparing to enjoy a show. Mine. I picked it up, finders keepers. Each word stabbed into the lining of my heart like a sharp needle. She didn't flinch. She said it slowly, clearly, with a brazenness I had never seen before. I looked her in the eye. "Belle, that's the ticket I bought. I kept it." Belle let out a soft laugh, but it scraped the air like shattered glass across a tabletop. "You didn't keep it. Well, whose fault is that? I found it in this house, which makes it mine. You're old. Stop fighting me over everything." Her voice was sweet as syrup, but poisonous like well water gone sour, every word crafted to wound. Belle stood up and came close, her breath reeking of smugness. "You want that ticket? Dream on." Then she stepped back, tossed her hair, and raised her voice with arrogant pride. "I'm gonna buy this dump and kick you and that crippled boy out on the street." The whole room exploded with that one sentence. My chest tightened, but the heavier blow came from Mason's sob behind me. Mason tried to wheel himself closer, his voice trembling. "Belle, what are you saying? This is my mother's home." Belle spun around, eyes flaring. "Home? This shack? You shut up. A cripple like you should stay silent." Mason reached for the armrest, trying to rise, but his legs buckled beneath the weight of the shame Belle had just hurled at him. I had never seen my son collapse like that. His shoulders shook, tears streaming down his pale cheeks. I stepped beside him, laid a hand on his shoulder, but Belle burst out laughing like it was all just part of a show. Her laughter pierced the air, slamming into me, waking something that had been suppressed for too long. I don't remember how I stepped forward. All I heard was the rush of blood in my ears and a rage boiling past its limit. While Belle was still laughing, my hand shot up and the slap landed like lightning. Crack! The sound split the room like torn fabric. Belle's head snapped to the side, hand clutching her cheek, eyes wide with shock. That slap wasn't just for what she said. It was for every cruelty she had rained down on my son over the years. I looked at my trembling hand. It was the first time in my life that I had ever hit someone, and I knew I wasn't wrong. Belle stood frozen for a few seconds, her face drained of color, but her eyes began to swirl like a storm. Madness erupted from her, like the slap had blown open every dam she had tried to hold shut. "You're finished," Belle shrieked, her voice clashing like metal. She stormed up the stairs, heels pounding the wood. Mason called out in panic, but she didn't stop. She burst into my room, the door nearly ripping from its hinges. The sounds of furniture crashing, drawers banging, and glass shattering hit like thunder. I rushed after her, but it was too late. Belle grabbed clothes, keepsakes, Arthur's photos, and flung them out the window like garbage. The wedding photo of my husband and me spun in the air before landing on the cement below. I gasped for breath. Every object hurled felt like a blade to my chest. I screamed, "Belle, stop!" "Those are your mother's," Belle screamed back. "Your junk? This house is mine now." Mason tried to push his wheelchair up the stairs to stop her, but every step was like a mountain. He clenched his teeth, using his arms to pull himself upward, pressing against the stair rails with all his might. But Belle suddenly came charging down, grabbed the armrest, yanked it, and Mason lost his balance. He toppled, crashing to the floor, hands flailing for something to hold on to. Belle looked down at Mason sprawled on the cold floor and hissed through gritted teeth, "I'm divorcing you, Mason. No way I'm staying married to a broke cripple." A sentence so cruel I couldn't believe it came from someone who had once been his wife for 9 years. Mason lay there, eyes red, tears mixed with sheer helplessness. Ava and Micah ran out of their room, clinging to each other in terror. Ava sobbed while Micah clutched her shirt hem tightly. I rushed to Mason, lifted him, and set him back in his chair. His body was ice cold, his face pale, like all breath had been stripped away. Belle stood at the top of the stairs, eyes bloodshot, glaring at us. I pulled Mason away from her, my heart pounding in pain. There was nothing left to hide. The darkness in Belle had torn through the mask she had worn all these years. I could see it clearly now: ambition, spite, contempt, and a madness ignited by a lottery ticket. Belle descended the stairs slowly, savoring the chaos she had unleashed. In that moment, I knew she had crossed every line. No longer a daughter-in-law, no longer a wife, no longer human. Fortune had awakened a dormant cruelty, turning her into a storm of wrath. She stopped right in front of me, leaned down, looked at Mason, then at me. Her gaze made my spine go cold. A thin smile curled on Belle's lips, the smile of someone who had tasted power and knew it made others tremble. I opened my mouth to tell her to stop, but Belle suddenly turned away and stepped into the living room. I thought she was getting her things, but when I looked again, I saw something small and pale yellow in her hand, folded many times over. The light hit it, glowing like an open wound under the sun. I recognized it instantly. The veins in my neck pulsed, ready to burst. Belle held the lottery ticket between 2 fingers, lifted it high so I could see every corner. She smirked, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "You see this? My luck." The entire next day, the house felt drowned in the chaotic energy Belle unleashed. I was picking up the mess she had thrown downstairs when I heard the phone ringing upstairs, over and over, rising and falling like a symphony of someone spiraling into madness for attention. I stepped into the living room and saw Belle standing in front of the mirror, hair slightly tousled, but eyes gleaming like someone clutching a secret powerful enough to shatter every moral code. She went live right there in the middle of the house. The bright screen reflected her beaming face. I stood next to the column, my insides boiling with every heartbeat. Hundreds of viewers appeared instantly, a flood of comments pouring in, full of flattery, praise, and propositions. Belle raised the phone near her mouth, smirking with a mix of contempt and triumph. 9 years putting up with my husband's family is enough. Now it's time I enjoy myself. Her voice echoed through the house, every word a cut straight into Mason's heart. I looked over at Mason sitting at the end of the room. My son had his head down, hands gripping the wheelchair armrest. Belle's words were being broadcast to the entire world, but Mason just sat there, his face pale like someone suffocating. Ava stood behind me, clutching my hand so tight her fingers turned red, afraid her mother might start screaming again. When the live stream ended, Belle didn't rest. She started calling everyone she knew. Within moments, a flock of opportunistic friends filled the front yard, some flaunting investment schemes, others suggesting resort getaways, and some even waving around loan papers. They swarmed around Belle like flies on honey. She sat in the middle of the living room, legs bouncing, eyes squinting like a vendor surveying goods at a night market. "Tomorrow I level up," she said, and the whole pack burst out laughing. I stood by the porch watching the chaos, their words striking my head like gravel scattered on concrete. They called Belle the soon-to-be rich lady, the new boss, a lucky star. Belle soaked in every word like she had already signed the check. Plastic cups rolled around, slippers scraped the floor, and their crude laughter echoed like looters celebrating a find in someone else's home. Once the crowd finally left, leaving behind suffocating perfume and a few snack wrappers on the table, Mason wheeled out of his room. He didn't look at Belle, just quietly placed the divorce papers on the table. The act stopped me cold. Belle glanced at the papers, frowned, then let out a laugh. Good, I was going to bring that up too. She signed with a swift flick of the wrist, every stroke dripping with satisfaction. Mason turned away, his shoulders slumping. I saw my son die a second time. Being insulted by his wife had hurt, but signing away someone you once loved was the blade that tore open his heart. Mason wheeled himself back into his room, shut the door, and I heard muffled sobs, pain choked down by someone trying to hold on to the last shred of dignity. Evening fell, wind drifting through the porch, bringing faint barking from afar. As I cleared the yard, Mrs. Penelope, our longtime neighbor, came over. She looked at the pile of clothes I hadn't finished picking up, her eyes filled with both concern and outrage on my behalf. "Lorraine, are you going to let your daughter-in-law destroy your life like this forever?" I looked down at my trembling hands, worn out. "Let her go," I said. "Her time will come." Mrs. Penelope sighed, but nodded. Some battles are best left to the enemy's own shovel. Night settled in, and the house sank into a heavy silence. Belle shut her door, faint music leaking out like the sound of someone fantasizing about a mansion. I made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. I thought of Mason, the 2 kids, and Belle's recklessness. I knew luck never lands in the hands of someone like her without dragging disaster behind it. As I was about to check on the kids' room, I heard unfamiliar footsteps in the backyard. At first, I thought it was a cat, but the steps were steady and deliberate and adults. I set my teacup down and stepped toward the window. The porch light was dim, surrounded by insects, but I could still make out a man's figure behind Belle's house, right below her bedroom window. I squinted to see clearly, heart pounding. The man walked closer to the door, looked around, then knocked lightly on the glass. The signal was so familiar, I almost called out, but I held back. Belle's door creaked open, yellow light spilling out. She peeked out, looked both ways, then pulled the man inside. I froze. That face, that body, that brown jacket, I had seen countless times in my home. He wasn't a stranger. He was Mason's best friend, the one who had dined in this very living room, toasted wine with my son, and once said, "I see Mason as my own brother." A shiver ran down my spine like a jolt of electricity. I stepped back into the shadows, held my breath to listen more clearly. From Belle's room came quiet laughter, the creak of a bed, and excited whispers. I bit my lip until it bled from rage. Belle wasn't just betraying Mason with words, she was doing it with her body, in my house, on the very night Mason signed the divorce papers, thinking he had nothing left to fight for. I peeked through the window one more time. The man placed his hand on Belle's waist, pulled her closer. He whispered something that made Belle laugh, sweet like syrup, but sharp as poison. A second later, Belle turned off the light. The room went dark. My entire body felt like it was sinking into a pit of ice. I turned away, fought back the tears, fought back the scream. Mason had suffered enough. But the truth standing before me was cruel enough to still the heavens. A traitorous daughter-in-law, a backstabbing best friend, and a lottery ticket capable of turning the wicked into monsters. I walked slowly back inside, afraid that even the sound of my footsteps might shatter Mason's heart in the next room. The house was pitch dark, with only the ceiling fan creaking and the soft sounds of the kids sleeping. I wanted to hold them tight, to chase away the fear that had just flooded through my chest. As I reached for the light switch, I heard Belle's door quietly open. I spun around. That man stepped out first, head low, sneaking like a thief. Belle followed, linking arms with him, giggling. Neither of them knew I stood there in the dark, only a few feet away. I had thought maybe I had heard wrong, maybe I saw wrong, maybe I imagined it all. But now there was no doubt left. I barely slept all night because of the image of Belle and that man. I lay in bed, eyes wide open in the dark, my heart pounding heavily like stones. The faint sound of wheelchair wheels in the hallway made me sit up. Mason was sitting there, his eyes bloodshot from a restless night. He looked at me for a long moment, then bowed his head as if trying to swallow a bitter truth. "Mom." Mason gripped the armrest of his wheelchair, his voice cracking. "I know Belle's been cheating. I've known for a long time." That sentence stunned me. I thought I'd be the one to break it to him first, but it turned out Mason had carried that pain silently for so long, hidden like a wound he didn't dare dress. I sat beside him and saw his hands trembling gently like dry leaves about to fall. Mason looked up so sorrowful that it tightened my chest. I saw her texting someone else a year ago. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding, but then she started coming home late, avoiding eye contact and hiding her phone. I knew everything. He paused, trying to hold back his voice. I just didn't want to believe that someone I loved so much could betray me when I was at my worst. I looked at my son, heart aching. The truth I was about to reveal was crueler than Belle's affair. It could shatter Mason's heart all over again, but I knew it was too late to keep it hidden. Mason needed to see that woman's true face to sever ties once and for all. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mason, you need to hear what I'm about to say." He turned toward me, his eyes hollow, waiting for something even worse. I took a deep breath, each word a heavy stone falling from my lips. He didn't come to Belle for love. He came for the lottery ticket. Mason froze. The veins in his neck stood out, and a few seconds passed like a lifetime. "You mean he's after money?" I gave a faint nod. Mason leaned his head back, exhaling like he'd been punched in the chest. "So everything I thought was just an excuse?" His voice crumbled, breaking into fragments. I told Mason about what I saw last night, my voice low but sharp, each detail carving into his heart. He said nothing, just stared down at his immobile legs, then covered his face with his hands. "I thought you and I were a burden. I thought Belle found someone else because I couldn't walk anymore, couldn't be a real man. But it turns out I wasn't even the reason. I was just an excuse for her to leave me." The air in the room froze, heavy as stone, pressing down on both our shoulders. I heard Mason's labored breaths, the sound of someone who had just lost their last sliver of faith. I knew Mason wasn't only hurting because Belle betrayed him, but because of the long process of blaming himself, of shaving away his pride to hold on to someone who no longer loved him. I gripped Mason's hand tightly. "You are not a burden to anyone. Belle betrayed you because she's greedy. That man is nothing but a leech clinging to that lottery ticket." Mason stayed silent, eyes staring off as if trying to piece together every shattered fragment in his mind. So I was just a means to an end. His voice turned hoarse, soft but full of despair. I sighed. "Mason, I think it's time you let her go. She chose her path. And I glanced toward Belle's room, where the faint sound of music still echoed. I will put an end to this. Mason looked at me, his eyes still red, but now with a touch of clarity after the storm. I gently patted Mason's back. When the money arrives, let her leave first. Let me say the final words. Let me force her to show her true face in front of everyone. Mason tilted his head, trying to hide the last traces of sorrow. Mom, what are you going to do? I didn't answer immediately. In my mind was the image of Belle laughing in the yard, talking about kicking Mason and me out like old furniture. I stood up, going over every piece of the plan in my head, every step, every word, every moment. Belle thought she was about to become rich, thought luck was on her side, but she forgot that some battles aren't won with money, they're won with truth. And that truth, I would make her face herself. Night fell, and the house was bathed in dim yellow light. The walls seemed soaked in tension. The children were asleep, Mason was quiet in his room, and I sat in the living room watching Belle's shadow pace back and forth in hers. I heard her laughter, mixed with the constant pings of her phone buzzing with congratulatory messages. The intoxication of false power had turned Belle into someone entirely different. Near midnight, I met Mason again. He stood at his door, eyes still red, but his voice steadier. Mom, you did the right thing. I won't confront Belle anymore. I'll let you handle it. I looked at my son and saw the painful maturity in him, a bitter but necessary acceptance. Get some rest, I said. We need to stay sharp tomorrow. The next morning, I heard a loud noise out front. Belle had just opened the door and stepped outside. Sunlight hit her delighted face, her expression glowing like someone basking in victory. A long limousine was parked at the gate, drawing the neighborhood's attention. Belle climbed the front steps, her heels clicking against the tiles, talking nonstop on her phone. I'm heading to headquarters to claim the prize. Get ready, I'm making it big. Her voice echoed down the street. I stood near the kitchen door, watching from a distance. Belle's shadow stretched across the pavement like a blinding flash of arrogance. She opened the car door and looked back at the house with the eyes of a victor. That look sent a chill down my spine. Mason wheeled himself into the living room, looked at me for a long time, then opened the small drawer beside his seat. He pulled out the divorce papers we had signed days before. He placed them firmly and solemnly into my hand. Mom, let this be the evidence. When you call me in, I'll sign the final copy. I looked at my son and saw no trace of weakness or collapse in him, only the resolve of someone who had endured too much and now chose to rise. Belle shut the limousine door, the click sounding like the end of her relationship with Mason. I stepped onto the porch, watching the car roll away from the home of 3 generations, carrying with it the charm Belle believed would change her life forever. But I knew what she took with her wasn't luck. It was the curse of greed. That morning, Savannah finally saw some sunshine after days of damp weather. I sat by the window watching Mason try once more to fold the divorce papers, as if he could fold that failed marriage into a small corner where he wouldn't have to see it again. Belle was different. She stormed out of the house, heels clacking against the tile floor, her eyes burning like the whole world was about to kneel before her stride. I knew she had prepared that dress for a long time. Belle always had the most expensive things despite her modest salary, and I had no doubt where the money came from. But today, all that glamour only made her look pitiable. She strutted toward the limousine waiting at the gate and opened the door with exaggerated flair. I stood behind the curtain, calm and silent, as though I had already seen the end of Belle's story before she ever did. The limousine took Belle to the headquarters to claim the prize. Mason sat next to me on the bus, gripping the wheel of his wheelchair tightly as if trying to hold on to his composure. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Let me handle this," I whispered. Mason just nodded and turned his face toward the window, his eyes distant, like someone who had just watched everything he once believed in fall apart. When we arrived, I stayed in the lobby, letting Mason wait behind a partition. I didn't want Belle to see us too early. The building was polished like glass, the line of people steady, the hum of air conditioning soft, and the click of heels echoing across marble floors. In that formal space, Belle was the most out-of-place thing there. Belle walked in like a queen at her coronation. Her glittering tight dress hugged her body, her lips were painted in bright red, and her smile curled with smugness. She glanced at the staff like they existed solely to serve her. Some people looked up, others whispered. She liked that, slowed her pace so everyone would watch. She marched straight to the reception desk, her voice sharp and haughty. "I'm here to collect my prize. Take me to a private room. I don't have time to wait with the others." The receptionist behind the counter scanned her from head to toe, then gave a polite but cold smile. "Please provide documentation and your lottery purchase receipt." Belle raised her brows in irritation. "What documentation I'm here to collect? And here's the ticket." She pulled the lottery slip from her purse, holding it between two fingers like it was a piece of fine jewelry. But as soon as the receptionist looked down at the ticket, Belle's expression began to shift. "Receipt?" the staff asked. "We need proof of purchase, signature on the back, and identification matching the registered information." Belle froze. 2 seconds of complete silence made the entire front desk so still that you could hear footsteps at the entrance. She forced a smile. "I found it. Whoever finds it gets to claim it." Another staff member stepped forward, locking eyes with her. "This ticket has an owner's name on record. We're required by law to process accordingly. Just showing up with it doesn't make it yours." Belle's face turned red, her eyes wide with shock. "I held it. I brought it here. I'm the one claiming it." "Doesn't that make it mine?" Her voice began to crack, trembling, like someone choking on water. The staff looked at her as if she were becoming a problem. "Possession isn't ownership. You have no receipt, no signature, no supporting documents. This isn't your property." Someone in the line behind clicked their tongue. "She stole the ticket from her mother-in-law, didn't she? I saw that online," another whispered. "Coming here without documents, bold. Thought it'd be easy, huh?" Belle heard every word. Her face went from pale to purple. "No, that ticket's mine. I lived in that house. I held it." Her voice dropped, then erupted. "No one's taking it from me." The receptionist shook their head. "If you continue yelling, we'll have to call security. And if you're knowingly attempting to claim money on behalf of the rightful owner, that's considered a criminal offense." Belle took a step back. I thought she might cry, but Belle wasn't the kind to collapse easily. She raised her chin, clinging to whatever pride she had left. "Then bring someone in charge. I don't deal with underlings," she snapped, though her voice quivered uncontrollably. A crowd had begun to gather, eyes fixed on Belle. She told herself they were jealous, but in truth, they looked at her like someone digging their own grave. A couple nearby spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Winning the lottery and showing up without paperwork? Classic case of someone thinking the world owes them forever." By then, Belle's hands were clenched so tightly her nails dug into her skin. I stood in the lobby watching it all unfold, quiet like a shadow, witnessing a downfall that needed no intervention. I saw Mason behind me, his eyes locked on Belle, more sorrowful than angry, as though he were staring at someone who had once been his whole sky, but was now nothing but ashes. I reached for his shoulder. It's time. The head officer stepped out of the prize processing room, face stern. He looked at Belle and asked, "You're saying this ticket belongs to you?" Belle nodded hard, nearly shouting, "Yes, it's mine. I held it. I came here to claim it." He turned the ticket over. "There's a signature on the back." Belle froze. "Signature what?" Her voice shrank. "The owner's name," he replied, scanning the writing. "It's someone else, not you." Belle choked like her throat had been seized. The crowd's whispering swelled. "See? She really did steal it. Knew it from the start. Look at her greed. Makes you stupid." Belle's face flushed, but her eyes blazed. "I held it. I lived in that house. I have a right." The officer crossed his arms. "You have no proof. You're just the one holding it, not the owner." A light above the hallway turned on. The door to the main room slowly opened. The officer glanced toward it, then back at Belle. "And now we invite the legal owner of the ticket to come forward." Mason swallowed hard, his hand clenched. Belle turned toward the door, eyes wide, breath fractured. The whole room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning brushing against the shining walls. The door opened fully. Light from within spilled out into the hall. Everyone held their breath. Belle stood still, body wobbling slightly, as if searching for something to hold on to. The officers stepped aside, clearing the way, and I stepped into the prize claims room. I walked in without looking at Belle. The room was spacious, the white lights shining down on the verification desk as if illuminating a judgment stand prepared just for that morning. The head officer gave a slight nod, then turned to the crowd. I heard whispers behind me, someone murmuring, "Isn't she that girl's mother-in-law?" The air was thick, tense enough that a single sharp breath might shatter it. I placed my bag on the table, calmly pulling out a file. Belle saw the pale yellow slip of the receipt, and her face twisted, shoulders tensing like someone had just squeezed her throat. I handed over the ticket receipt, the signature copy on the back, and the printout from the store security camera. "These are all the documents," I said, my voice low but sharp like a blade fresh from the whetstone. The officer took the file, reviewed each page, and compared every detail. His eyes paused on the signed acknowledgement form I had filled out weeks ago, Lorraine Whitmore. The room fell silent. He placed the documents down and declared clearly, "The rightful owner of the lottery ticket is Mrs. Lorraine Whitmore." Belle's face drained, her lips moved, but no words came out. She stepped forward to snatch the papers, but the officer stopped her. "You are not allowed to touch the evidence." Belle nearly screamed, her voice cracking. "You old witch! You gave me a fake ticket. You tricked me." I looked straight into her eyes. "I didn't give you anything. You took it from my drawer, remember, Belle?" It was like she'd been slapped. She staggered back, stopping when she hit the edge of the table. The room erupted in murmurs. A young woman on the right shook her head. "Who claims millions from a ticket with someone else's name on it?" An older man adjusted his glasses and muttered, "Greed brings shame in the end." Belle spun around looking at everyone, her eyes darting for someone, anyone to defend her. But the only reflection she met was her own self-loathing in the building's polished glass. She gasped, her hands clenched, then opened, trying to suppress the rising panic. "If I have it, it's mine," she shouted, her voice hoarse with fear. Just then, Mason wheeled into the room. The sound of his wheels scraping the tile echoed like fate delivering its final sentence to Belle. He stopped a few steps away, eyes hollow from sleepless nights and the pain of betrayal. Belle Mason said, voice quiet but crystal clear, even our divorce, you're dragging that into someone else's money too. The room froze. Belle looked at Mason like she'd seen a ghost in daylight. Her eyes twitched, red on the verge of tears, but not from sorrow. It was the look of someone realizing they're about to lose the last pillar holding them up. You don't understand," Belle said, stepping back half a step. Mason's gaze stayed icy. "I understand everything. I've understood for a long time." That broke her lips into a tremble. She tried to reach for his chair, but a man's voice interrupted. "I'm out of here." A man leaning against the wall who had avoided all eye contact until now. It was him, Belle's lover. Hat pulled low, sunglasses hiding half his face, but when he took them off, I saw the cowardice in his eyes. Belle shouted, "Where are you going?" "We had a deal. You promised me." His reply was cold, flat, crushing what little trust she clung to. "I thought you actually owned it. Turns out you just snatched someone else's ticket. You're on your own." He turned and left to the sound of scornful murmurs. Belle stumbled as if shoved. She grabbed the edge of the table, but her hand slipped off the cold glass. Her whole body shook, her legs buckling. In her eyes, I saw something familiar, the look of someone who just lost everything after a high-stakes gamble and realized they never had anything to begin with. She collapsed to the floor, hands clutching her skirt, hair falling over half her face. People stepped back, wary she might lash out. An officer offered tissues, but Belle knocked them aside, the tissue sliding across the marble. "No, I don't believe this," she whispered. "I held it. I brought it here. I deserve it." I approached, stopping just one step in front of her. "Belle, you can believe you deserve whatever you want, but the law is clear. Property belongs to its rightful owner, and that ticket never belonged to you." Belle looked up, eyes bloodshot, staring at me like I'd stolen her future. "Are you trying to destroy my life, Lorraine?" I answered, voice calm as running water. "You did that yourself." Belle bit her lip, twisting her hands. I saw tears fall, but not the kind born from remorse. They were the tears of someone who's always taken, now losing everything and unraveling. She tilted her head toward Mason, pleading for one more chance. But Mason simply leaned forward, placed the divorce papers on the verification desk, and slid them toward the officer. "We're done," Mason said. "There's nothing more to say." Belle opened her mouth like she wanted to scream, but the words caught in her throat. She snatched the divorce papers, crumpled them, and flung them aside. "You're leaving me for your mom's money. You're pathetic." Mason closed his eyes, took a long breath, then stared straight at her. "I'm leaving because you left me a long time ago." The whole room seemed to sink into a new level of silence, heavier, deeper. Belle's shoulders sagged, her lips lost color, and her body shrank into the vast floor. I thought she would stay silent, but then she sprang up, palms on the ground like a cornered animal. She stood, steadied her breath, and looked at me. That gaze was pitch black, a bottomless pit where her soul had begun to fracture. Belle stepped toward me, heels striking the cold tile with a sharpness that chilled the room. She stopped, just a hand's width away, breathing rapid and broken. "You think you've won?" she asked, voice ragged. "You think a few documents will let you keep everything?" I didn't answer. I wanted to see what she would do next. Belle gave a bitter laugh. No pride left, just poison. "Lorraine, I'll sue you." She spoke every word like a vow. I'll drag you to court, prove you stole my family's property. I'll get it back." Gasps and anxious murmurs rippled through the room. A staff member stepped forward cautiously. "You don't have any evidence to sue." Belle spun on him, eyes blazing. "I'll find it. I'll tear her life apart piece by piece and take back every damn cent." Her hand trembled as she spoke, like the final thread of control had snapped into a storm of venom. After that humiliating morning at the prize headquarters, Belle vanished for a few days. I thought she had gone into hiding somewhere to swallow her shame, but then the rumors started to spread across the neighborhood. People said Belle went online accusing me of being delusional, claiming I'd forgotten who really paid the bills, even alleging that I stole shared property. I read every word, my heart turning to stone. Belle tried to use the media to salvage her dignity, but she didn't realize she was ripping apart the last of it with her own hands. I filed a countersuit as soon as Attorney Mason sent the documents. The court accepted it faster than expected, since Belle's mess had already become a local scandal. In the hearing, Belle stammered through each sentence, unable to present a single shred of evidence to support her accusations. The judge stared at her in disbelief, while my lawyer simply submitted the ticket purchase receipt, a signed copy, and a formal statement from headquarters confirming I was the rightful owner. The ruling was swift. Belle lost entirely. She was ordered to pay damages for defamation and fined for intentional false accusations. Her face upon hearing the verdict turned pale as a statue thrown into the snow. She walked down the courthouse steps trembling, like someone waking from a nightmare, but this was only the beginning of the collapse. The friends who once swarmed around Belle like ants to sugar were gone without a trace. They blocked her on social media, ignored her calls. They said being associated with a woman caught in a lawsuit was too much trouble. Someone even left a snide comment, living the fake life until the power went out. Belle read each line as if being slapped over and over. The same people who once worshipped her now turned away with impossible speed. Belle sought out her lover, hoping he'd offer her a place to lean on, but he had already left the city. Word had it, he left one sentence behind at a bar. "Without money, she's got nothing going for her." That line was relayed back to Belle like a razor-edged blade. She stood in the parking lot, face drained of all color, as she took in every word. Once the lawsuit made headlines, Belle was fired from her company for ethical violations and for damaging the brand's reputation. She went back to ask for her job, but her former boss rejected her outright. The HR door closed, leaving Belle alone in the empty hallway like a drifter. Employees who used to flatter her when they thought she'd won the lottery now stepped aside and pretended not to know her. Financial pressure came down like a violent storm. The landlord of her rental unit sent a notice terminating the lease due to complaints and unpaid rent from the previous month. Belle had no money left. Nearly all her savings had gone to shopping parties and buying favors from sycophants. Old creditors began texting demanding payment. One even came to her door occasionally threatening to call the police. Belle crumbled piece by piece. She lost her job, her reputation, even the cozy bed she once slept in. All she had left was a messy pile of belongings stuffed into a backpack and a hollowed-out body stripped of pride. Her days as the lottery queen were now a joke people retold over tea. My three-generation home at that time was wrapped in rare peace. Mason had signed the final divorce papers and handed me a copy. He resumed physical therapy, trying to make time for the kids. As for me, I no longer thought much about Belle. Everything she caused had met the price it deserved. But life has a strange way of circling back, and just when you think you've completed the loop, the darkness returns to find you. One evening, it started to rain. Not a heavy rain, but long and cold, dragging with it a gloomy stillness. I was locking the kitchen door when I heard a knock at the gate. At first I thought it was the wind loosening the latch, but when the knock came again, slow and faint, I knew someone was out there. I stepped onto the porch and turned on the yellow light above the door. The light shone onto the iron gate where a figure stood hunched and shivering. Rain soaked her hair, ran down her shoulders, and drenched both hands gripping the gate. I recognized that face, though it was now weary, pale, and tinged with cold. Belle stood at my gate, trembling like a leaf torn apart by the wind. Her eyes were filled with fear and despair, nothing like the woman who once threatened to buy this house back. She opened her mouth, her voice so soft it nearly dissolved into the rain. "Miss Lorraine, I have nowhere else to go." That rainy night when I saw Belle standing in front of my gate, I knew the story had reached its final chapter. She stood there shivering, clutching the iron bars like someone about to drown and trying to hold on to the last remaining thing. The porch light cast a pale glow on her face, the same face once flushed with arrogance, now drained and frozen in despair. I opened the gate but left my anger behind because I understood this moment wasn't for revenge. It was to mark the end. Belle stepped into the small yard, but I raised my hand to stop her. I looked at her for a long time. The remnants of the haughty mask Belle used to wear had been washed away by the rain. The woman before me was no longer the one who shouted to kick me out of my own home, no longer the one who dismissed Mason into a pit of humiliation, no longer someone who believed she was born to walk over others. Now there was only a person trembling like a candle about to go out. I spoke to her in an oddly calm voice. "I won't save you, but I'll show you the way to stand up." That sentence made Belle break down, not with the furious or defiant sobs of the past, but like something inside her had finally shattered after all these years. For the first time, Belle admitted everything she had once denied. "I was wrong. I've lost everything. I don't know where to go anymore." I didn't reach out to hold her. I didn't yell or push her away. I stood at the boundary I needed to maintain so I wouldn't drown with her. I suggested places where she could find legal assistance, gave her the contact for a free psychological counseling service, and pointed out agencies that offered hourly jobs for people in need. I handed her the number for emergency housing support. After everything, those were the things she truly needed, not money, not blind forgiveness, but I didn't open my door to her. I looked straight at Belle and said, "This door has closed because of what you've done. You can get back on your feet, but not in this house anymore." Belle lowered her head, didn't protest, didn't beg. I saw in her eyes a kind of acceptance I never thought someone like Belle could have. She turned and walked away, each step as if she were treading across the ruins of her own past. After Belle left, I returned to Mason. My son sat in the small office, hands on the keyboard. His eyes no longer carried the redness from sleepless, tearful nights. He was rebuilding his career from that old computer, attending online classes and working remote customer service jobs. Months of consistent therapy had steadily improved his mental health. I heard the laughter of Ava and Micah echoing from the other room, and I realized how long it had been since their voices weren't drowned out by meaningless arguments. Mason reclaimed his life in the simplest yet strongest way. Without Belle behind him, pulling the strings of every word, he spent more time with his children, learned to cook, practiced moving independently in his wheelchair, and worked even though his legs could no longer hold him up. I looked at Mason and saw the strong man he used to be gradually return, not through a miracle, but through the willpower Belle once tried to crush. As for me, I looked at the lottery ticket that had triggered all the chaos and knew that if I used the money for myself, I would always feel the lingering pain it carried. So I started a small fund to support elderly people who suffered psychological abuse, something I never imagined doing before. I met people like me, elders disrespected by their daughters-in-law, scolded by their sons, treated as burdens by their own families. They sat before me with clouded eyes, but hearts still yearning to live with dignity, and I knew I'd made the right choice. My house was full of laughter again. Strange how, after everything, the family didn't fall apart. It became clearer. Those who stayed were meant to stay. Those who left never truly belonged. My story isn't to condemn Belle, but to remind us that greed enriches no one. It only magnifies who they really are. And forgiveness isn't about letting those who hurt you back in. It's giving them a chance to stand on their own. If you followed this far, I want to leave you with this. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's how you protect the peace you fought so hard to earn. And if you want to keep hearing stories about family karma and the life lessons I've lived and witnessed, follow the channel. Share this story with someone you think might need a gentle but strong reminder to wake up. Who knows, the next story might be the one you've been waiting for.